Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance is provided by TLC, Oklahoma's leading garden center, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, Tulsa's source for great gardens, southwoodgardencenter.com. and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. On today's program, we are going to help get your garden started. Host Casey Hentges has the basics of seed starting and damping off the seedlings. We sow cool season vegetables. We talk with a horticulture student who is doing research on an easier way to plant daffodils, and Casey has tips to get your tomatoes off to a good start.
February, you want to start thinking about what seeds you're going to start in your garden. Now, if you're like me, you've probably gone to the nursery and you wanted to buy a bell pepper seed pack and a jalapeno seed pack, and you probably didn't plant all those seeds. So if you have leftover seeds, you want to have stored those in a dry, cool location, such as a refrigerator, as we've done here, and you probably are not sure whether these seeds will germinate next year or not. So what we're going to do is test these seeds. Now, oftentimes you'll find there is a date on the seed packs, such as this is December 31st of 2015. But this seed pack has no date on it. So we're not sure if this is from last year or some previous years. And what you want to do to check the germination is simply get some paper towels. We're going to wet these paper towels here and just wring those out a little bit. Kind of open them back up here. So now that you have your wet paper towels, you're going to simply place 10 seeds down the middle of this. There's 9, need one more, 10 seeds. And simply just fold this over. Make sure you've got good contact with the wet paper towel and the seeds. Fold those up so they stay nice and wet. And you want to make sure that you write either on your baggie or on a label. If you do it on a label, it's kind of nice because then you can use this label when you plant up your seeds later on. We want to make sure that we write what kind of plant we are growing. In this case, we are testing summer squash, and the date is January 20th of 16. We're going to put this in our plastic baggie with our label, and you want to make sure to seal that up tightly and press out some of the air. So for this situation, in this test, we're going to let this set for about a week. You can often look at your seed pack and it'll give you an idea of how long it'll take to germinate. For these squash, it says it recommends 4 to 10 days, but you might want to check those periodically. And it doesn't hurt to check it daily. You just want to make sure that you seal it every time so that we maintain the moisture in there. We did this about a week ago. So we're going to check our seeds and see which ones have germinated. So here you can see we have 10 seeds, and it looks like 1, 2, 3 seeds have germinated. So if we figure 3 out of the 10 seeds have germinated, we can assume that if we planted this seed packet, we would have about a 30% germination rate. Now this is kind of low. So in this situation, it would be best to go ahead and buy new squash seeds. If you did want to plant these, it would be best to go ahead and plant these up because you can see here that there is a root already beginning to grow. So you would just gently poke a hole in the soil and put this in there and very gingerly put soil around it. Now there is another test that you can do also, and that's called the water test. So here we have, again, some more squash seeds that we want to test. We put about 20 in here, and we're just going to fill this up with water. So you might just tap them to make sure any air bubbles that are on the outside of the seeds come off. And we're going to let this set for about 15 minutes and come back and check them. So now we've let these set for about 15 minutes. And if you look of the 20 seeds, there's 5 that have sunk to the bottom. And what this tells us is that 5 seeds are still potentially viable. It's the ones that sink that we feel will potentially germinate. The ones that are floating, the seed coat has broken, and so air has permeated into that seed and potentially dried out the embryo. So the ones that are floating are the bad seeds, the ones that sink are the good seeds. Now, this test is a little bit quicker than the paper towel test. However, it doesn't really give you as accurate of a result. In this particular situation, we had 5 seeds that sunk, so 5 divided by a total of 20 seeds gives us about a 25% germination rate. The reason why this test is not quite as accurate is because we're not actually germinating any seeds. We are just looking at the physical condition of those seeds. Now, in this paper towel test, we have actually germinated 3 of the 10 seeds, and so this has given us the result 30% germination rate. So these are both low germination rates, which means we need to probably go buy new seeds if we want to grow squash plants this year. And I always like a good excuse to go buy new seeds, and I probably will pick up a few extra also. So many of you are probably beginning to think about what seeds you want to plant in your garden this year, and you might even be starting them early inside somewhere. A lot of times this is a simple thing to do, but you might encounter a problem if you're seeing some of your seedlings start to die. And I want to share with you guys what's happening to some of our seedlings here. And this is a thing called damping off, which is a fungus that attacks your young seedlings when they're most vulnerable. It also can attack some larger plants, but usually that results in crown rot or root rot. In young seedlings, though, this tends to start right at the soil line, and you'll see these seedlings turn brown at the soil line. As it grows up, eventually your seedling will just fall over and die. Sometimes this attacks seeds prior to germination, and the seed will just turn mushy and brown. And sometimes it attacks the roots, and it takes a while for you to start noticing it up above on the seedlings. Overwatering and cool soil temperatures also encourages damping off. I'm going to pull one of these up so you guys can kind of see what we're talking about. And you can see on this lower part of the stem right here at the soil line, you can see how it's turning brown right there and shriveling up. Eventually this is going to keep going up the stem and cause this seedling to die. But that's what has weakened it right there, causing it to fall over, so that you know that it's already affected by the dampening off. I'm also going to pull up a healthy one here. Well, the one that's not showing signs just yet. And you can see how the stem is green all the way to where it meets the roots. So at this point, it hasn't been infected by the pathogen yet, but if it was to stay in here much longer, it probably would. Or it's just not showing the symptoms just yet. So you want to make sure that you're using sanitized equipment. This is one of the best ways to prevent your seedlings from damping off. So we have new potting containers here that we're going to use. A lot of times people will recycle some of their old containers, and that's fine. Or they might even use old food containers. And again, this is perfectly fine, but you want to make sure that's sanitized first. So one of the best ways is to use a 10% bleach solution and soak those containers for about 30 minutes just to really make sure that they're clean of those pathogens. Now, the other thing you want to make sure you use is new potting media, because this has been sterilized before you get it. The other thing is it's got a lot of good structure still in it. If you have old potting media, a lot of times people want to use that, but I say that that's best to just go into the compost pile. Now, you can see here in our seedlings, we've got this damping off that's starting to occur. Again, it starts at the soil line there in this case, and it's working its way up some of the seedlings. What happens is it spreads pretty rapidly. So we have overseeded this little container. There's way too many seedlings in here, and that prevents good airflow between those seedlings, and that also encourages that pathogen to really spread. So this is not an ideal situation. What we should have done would be to put 1 or 2 seeds in a 6-pack. This will allow plenty of airflow, and it will allow those seedlings to have their best chance of growing in a new, clean container with new potting soil. So if you're directly sowing your seeds outdoors, you want to make sure that your bed has good drainage and also that the soil isn't compacted. Having a lot of moisture in the soil is what allows this pathogen to grow quickly and cause that damping off in the seedlings also. So I hope this gives you a good idea of what causes damping off, and if you see your seedlings start to decline, know that that's what you're dealing with, and it's best to just really prevent it in the beginning with good sanitation, good airflow, and also not overwatering your seedlings. After completing our pallet garden, it's time to plant it, and we're going to plant it with some cool season crops. And when we say cool season crops, typically we're referring to crops that we're after the root or the leaf. A lot of times people don't know the difference between cool season and warm season, and basically a good general way to think about it is what part of the plant you're after. So carrots, radishes, and beets, those are all root crops, and we're after the root on those. Lettuce and spinach, we're after the leaves. So it doesn't take a plant as long to produce those versus, say, a warm season crop such as a tomato or eggplant where you're after the fruit. So those are what we consider warm season crops, and that's just a general rule. But today we're going to plant some cool season, like I said, and we're going to plant carrots, beets, spinach, and some leaf lettuce in here. Typically cool season crops like to grow in about 55 to 60 degree temperatures, and so February, March is an ideal time to get these started. What we're going to do here is we want to create a row to plant our seedlings in. So these seeds that we're planting are pretty small too, so they don't need to be buried very deep. We've got some colorful carrots here that we're going to plant. They don't really need to be buried too deeply, so we're just going to slowly tap these into our little groove that we've created, and that way we don't have to bury them too deep. We can actually just cover the soil a little bit, tapping it in, and that way those seeds don't blow away. And now they're going to grow in thick, but what we'll do is come back after they start germinating and kind of thin those out by pulling a few out and allowing the ones that are growing to continue to get bigger and have that space to do so. Now after we have those planted, we want to make sure we get a label on them. So we have carrots here, and they are colorful carrots. And we also want to make sure we put the date on there too. So now that we have that, we will mark that at the end of our row here, and so when we start seeing something germinate, we'll know what those are coming up. Finally, the last thing that we need to do is water those in, and we will repeat this process with our other cool season crops such as radishes, spinach, lettuce, and beets. On our keyhole garden, we're going to do things a little bit differently. We are going to plant cool season crops in here, but we're actually going to plant in concentric circles around the compost pile instead of straight lines like we would do in other gardens. Now we're going to plant some lettuce in here. We already have a trench in a semicircle around our compost pile here, so we're going to go ahead and plant some lettuce seeds. Now again, these seeds are pretty small, so we're just going to tap those into our line that we have. And the reason why we're doing it in a concentric circle around the compost pile is to help allow that water to flow from the compost pile and also that nutrients. And because it is sloped a little bit, that will help kind of hold that soil in place. Now we're just going to cover these up a little bit and water them in. We didn't plant any carrots in this bed because of the soil profile. It is a new bed and it hasn't decomposed just yet, so we didn't want to have a long taproot in it. We will plant beets because those are a smaller taproot, and then also the leaf lettuce because, again, the crop that we're going to be getting is coming from above, not below the ground. The other thing you might want to think about when you're planting this is to make sure that you don't have the smaller height crops towards the center. You want to make sure your taller crops are towards the center and the height of the crops go down as you go down the slope of the keyhole garden. If you're interested in more cool season crops, there's a great fact sheet that you can check out online. Here at Oklahoma State University, there's a lot of research being conducted, and we often think of it being conducted by the professional scientists and the faculty, but we also have a lot of students that are doing some studies of their own. Joining me today is Katie Lehman. She is an undergraduate research scholar and a senior in the Department of Horticulture. So you have a study going on. Can you tell me about it, Katie?
Yes, this study is seeing if bulbs can be planted above the ground without actually digging, and then if covered with mulch, if they will come up as normal.
Okay, so we potentially don't have to dig the daffodil bulbs into the ground.
Yes, that's what this study is looking at.
Okay, so what are you finding?
We're finding that the daffodil bulbs that are placed right on top of the ground and covered with mulch are doing just as well as our bulbs that we dug into the ground and planted.
Okay, and how many have you planted here?
In this section there's, I think, about 120, but we've actually done with our volunteers, the garden ambassadors, we did a section of bulbs up by the highway that has 10,000 bulbs in it.
Wow.
And they used this method and covered them with mulch, and it took just a few hours instead of several days.
So a big labor saving,
yes,
potentially. Okay, and so what bulbs are we looking at here? These are daffodils.
Yes, they are.
And are we just talking about daffodils, or are we talking about other bulbs also?
At this point, it's just daffodils.
Okay, all right. And now daffodils typically naturalize, and have we decided whether that will work for these?
We think that it's a definite possibility. This plot will be staying in for several years to see if we can see it happening in our research.
Okay.
But Dr. Anella, who I'm working with on this project, has done this same thing at his own home, have daffodil bulbs and covered them with mulch. And he's had that in for a couple of years, and he said that this year they've perennialized and they look even better than they did the first year.
So we're expecting that they will colonize, hopefully.
Yes.
And this is a small study, but it's an interesting aspect for homeowners to know about if they're looking for a lower maintenance way to have bulbs. And the other good thing is, you know, obviously if we don't have good soil, a lot of Oklahomans have clay soil. So that could potentially help also.
Yes, because we keep them above the ground, and so they have less of a potential of drowning anytime it gets really wet here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing with us, Katie.
Thank you.
As our soil temperatures are warming up and they're reaching above 60 degrees, it's time to start planting our tomatoes. This is something that we're all excited to do, and we anticipate every spring. Now, you may have remembered that we took a soil sample in our vegetable garden earlier this season, and we've got those results back. Now, it actually works out perfect for us because we had low nitrogen, high phosphorus, and moderate potassium, which is ideal for a tomato. If you didn't have this soil nutrition, what you'd want to do is get a complete fertilizer that has the ratio of about a 10-20-10 and put 1 to 2 pounds of that and just scatter it over 100 square feet. And as we're planting, you would incorporate that fertilizer. Now again, Our soil test results said that we have good nutrition here, so we don't need to do that. When you go to a nursery, a lot of times you get different types of plants coming in all sorts of containers. You can see we have a 6-pack here, we have a peat pot, and then we have some that we grew ourselves in a 6-inch container. And it really doesn't matter what they come in. You just want to make sure that you're getting the appropriate tomato for your purpose. What we have here is a Roma tomato, which is a paste tomato. And you can see it's fairly short. It has a little bit of root system to it, and we're just going to tease those out. Now, you want to plant your tomato about 5 to 6 inches deep. So here we're just going to go ahead and dig a hole and plant that in. We're not too concerned about the wind whipping this because it's not very tall. The other thing that's nice about when you get these from nurseries is they've been hardened off because they've been exposed to less ideal conditions than what they were probably receiving in the greenhouse. Now, if you get a tomato that comes in a peat pot, what you're going to want to do is actually tear off this plastic that lines it. You can plant it in this peat. You just want to make sure that that is not exposed to the air when you're planting it. If you want to go ahead and pull a little of the bottom off to allow those roots, that's good to do. We're just going to go ahead and bury that down in there. The other thing to notice here is we actually have 2 plants growing in this, and this is something you might want to take into account. We're going to just break this one off, pinch it with our fingers or with pruners, because really we just want 1 plant to grow. If we put 2 in this hole, they would be competing and they would both sacrifice a little bit. Now, a lot of times when you get a plant in, it might be much taller than those that we've already planted. This is an heirloom variety called Gold Rush, and you can see it's quite large and tall. Now, if we brought this in from the greenhouse, brought this out from the greenhouse, you would be concerned about the wind whipping it out in the garden. So what we're actually going to do, and tomatoes are one of the plants that you can do this to, is bury it deeper than what it was planted in the pot. So we're just going to dig our hole deeper and actually cover some of that stem up. There's another method that you can use when you're dealing with a tall tomato plant, and that's to dig a trench and lay the tomato down into that trench. Now here we have a taller tomato, and what you want to do is remove any of those smaller side branches that will be buried, such as that, and lay it down. You don't want to break the stem. That's important not to break it, but just simply kind of curve that stem up out of the ground and press firmly around that tomato plant, and you can see what was a taller tomato plant that you might be concerned about it breaking in the wind is now a much shorter plant, and along that stem it will grow a lot of roots that will give you a bigger root system. Whichever method you use to plant tomatoes, you want to make sure that you finish off your planting hole by digging a small well around those plants. Of course, after you plant these tomatoes, you want to make sure that they get a good drink of water. Now, we've planted some Roma tomatoes, some Jetstar, and some heirloom. The heirloom a lot of times don't have the same resistance as some of your cultivars such as Jetstar and Better Boy. You can look at the label on some of these cultivars to find that they are resistant to Fusarium and Verticillium wilt if that's a concern in your garden. Even though they say it's time to start planting in Oklahoma, we all know that we tend to get some of those late freezes here. So if you haven't used a wall of water, this might be something you want to add to your arsenal. Basically, it's just a thin piece of plastic that you slip over a tomato plant, and then you fill the cells with water. You might want to alternate the sides as you're filling that water to help support it. And the nice thing about these is these actually serve as a greenhouse to protect those tomatoes when the temperatures might be dropping a little. Now, if you leave it over your tomato and it does get warmer, you want to make sure to open the top of that so that it allows for airflow in there. If you want more information on growing tomatoes, check out our fact sheet. Have you started your seeds yet? It's almost time. We're in the greenhouse trying to stay warm as we prepare for spring. To find out more about what you need to be doing in the garden, join us February 11th as we begin a new season of Oklahoma gardening.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. Next week on Oklahoma Gardening, we have chores that get your garden ready for the season. We evaluate and clean up storm-damaged trees. We cut back and divide ornamental grasses, forced spring-flowering shrubs to enjoy inside, and Barbara Brown fuels our work with a tasty dish. So join us then for more TV you'll grow to love. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.